Hello and welcome to The Point World Affairs. I'm Tae Sang-mi. The world's 7th largest country by area and the 2nd most populous country with over 1.2 billion people. It has an average growth rate of roughly 7% a year, and it's the world's 7th largest economy by nominal GDP. These are all indicators that highlight the immense economic potential of India. But despite this, India's economy is finding itself in a bit of a rough patch, which is why Prime Minister Narendra Modi has been taking active steps to implement his so-called Modenomics policy of sweeping economic reform. On today's episode, we'll talk about the current state of India's economy and how Modenomics could help the country tap into its huge economic growth potential. For that, we have here Jagannath Panda, Senior Research Fellow at the Institute of Defence Studies and Analyses in New Delhi. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you.
Before we start our discussion, let's get a quick recap of India's current economic state.
At the 2018 World Economic Forum held in January, Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi gave the opening speech, which marked the first time in 21 years for an Indian head of state to open this global forum. In his speech, Modi appealed to investors around the world to invest in India as the government takes extreme measures to remove restrictions. It was a moment that showed how India's economy, which had been distribution-centered for more than 70 years since its independence, is transitioning into one that's more growth-oriented. India is considered one of the most promising countries for growth, being the world's 7th largest country by area and the 2nd most populous nation with over 1.2 billion people. But with a low growth rate and a focus on populist policies, economic development was relatively slow. On top of this, many global firms had avoided investing in India for a long period of time due to its lack of transparency and political risks. But things significantly took a turn for the better after Narendra Modi took office in May 2014. With the intention of developing India as one of the world's superpowers like China, Modi implemented the so-called Modenomics, which seeks to expand foreign investment, promote the manufacturing industry, and develop the country's infrastructure. Another major goal is the Make in India initiative, which seeks to increase the contribution of the manufacturing sector to 25% of the GDP by the year 2025 by easing corporate regulations and lowering corporate tax rates and create 100 million jobs. The Prime Minister has also traveled to 53 countries over the span of 3 years to encourage overseas firms to invest in India. As a result, foreign investment to India has roughly doubled over the past 3 years. What's more, not only did India exceed China's growth rate in the 4th quarter of last year, but is expected to post an 8.2% growth in 2022. Social problems that have hindered India's development are also being reformed. Along with Modi's currency reform that destroys 86% of the nation's currency to prevent corruption, his government has also implemented a goods and services tax to amalgamate the country's complicated mix of 500 types of state and federal tax into one single sales tax. Through these efforts, Modenomics is said to have given India hope for economic growth. Will India be able to maintain its fast growth rate and emerge as a new economic powerhouse like China?
Dr. Panda, so what is Modenomics and when did it actually start implementing?
The concept Modenomics actually started sometimes in 2013 and 14, right after the world started talking about Abenomics. As you know, Abenomics has been really the talking of the East Asian politics, primarily the Japanese economic reform policy. And Prime Minister Abe there, he's trying to bring out reforms to Japan's economic policy through structural reforms, through fiscal consolidation, through other measures like reforming the monetary policy of Japan and controlling the deflation. On the contrary, if you try to understand Modenomics, Modenomics is a replication of Abenomics plus a lot of other initiatives. Modinomics is all about economic reforms as well as political reforms and social reforms. There are 4 key aspects to Modinomics. One is continuing with reforms, but with a lot of risk. Reform with the risk is the mantra, the key to Modinomics. And I think if you see Prime Minister Modi's initiatives, whatever reform package he has introduced in last 3 to 4 years, he has actually brought out these reforms with a lot of risks. No other previous government or no other previous Prime Minister in India could afford to do that. So in that context, Modinomics is something really new and interesting. But there are also other elements to Modinomics. For example, it also talks about pro-development and pro-business friendly environment in India, which was really lacking. Of course, the global investors have shown a lot of interest towards Indian market over the last 1 decade, but that has not really fructified in India's economic development. So for the first time, Modinomics is talking about easing out the rules, easing out the administrative difficulties. He is bringing out a lot of administrative reforms to prepare for a business friendly and environmental friendly region in India where foreign investors could be invited to invest and do business with India. That is another hallmark of Modinomics. The third aspect of Modinomics is that it has a close linkages with India's social and political aspect. For example, India's infrastructural development is not really one of those highlighting aspects of India's growth story. In fact, India has been struggling on infrastructural point of view for a long time. Modinomics tries to address that gap. In fact, across India, one of the highlight of Modinomics is, and Modi's economic policy is to address the infrastructural deficiencies across all parts of India. The other distinguishing aspect of Modinomics is that it is also talking about the role of Indian government in a different way. If we try to understand, the government of India all this while was trying to fund most of the projects and try to keep away from holding up the responsibility. But this government not only offering a lot of funds for the project, but also acting as an enabler, as a facilitator, as a promoter of the initiatives. For example, you would see that Modinomics is trying to bring 50-50 equity into a business environment in India, where the government can contribute 50% and the other corporate sector or the business sector, the private sector can contribute another 50%. And Modinomics is going to facilitate in that way that the government can play a proactive facilitator roles. So these are the key aspects of Modinomics. One is that it talks about continuing with the reforms with risk. Second is it talking about business friendly environment. Third, it is talking about infrastructural development. Fourth, it is talking about a pro-government role, which is not only to give funds for the projects, but also take responsibility in terms of facilitating the projects and also promoting the projects.
Right. It seems like it's not just talking about economy. It's actually a way more wide range than we think, and it concerns financial aspects and all kinds of fields, really, with administrative field, as you said too. So what kind of fields were the most impacted by this policy?
A number of sectors have been actually benefited from Modinomics, though this is entirely a debatable issue in Indian context. There are many critics who says that Modinomics has actually not worked out in Indian context. But if you try to see the way Modinomics has been introduced, it has been introduced with a plan. With a systematic plan on targeting few sectors, and these sectors has been infrastructural development. As you see, the transport sector is being upgraded, the road transport sector and the railway transport sector. Then we are talking about the urban transportation, particularly the connections between the urban areas, between the main cities through the metro. Metro connection, metro rail connections. Then we are talking about flight connections. So communications and the transport section has been one of the key aspects of Modinomics, which has been really benefited. There are corporate and industrial sectors which has been really benefited. These industrial sectors and corporate sectors are being, some sort of freedom and flexibility to go out and also invite in inviting in the foreign investor to cooperate under initiatives like Make in India, Digital India, Skill India. Whereas they are also being given a free hand to go out and collaborate with the foreign investors. So these are the areas where Modinomics has actually benefited the Indian business communities and Indian people. But there are also gray areas where Modinomics has not really been fructified so far. For example, the agricultural sector, addressing the poverty, addressing the income gap that exists across the society, addressing the employment issue, which is the main issue in India currently. Every year there is a huge number of youths are actually being graduated and they are looking for job and employment, but that is not really being met out by the Modinomics for over the last 3 to 4 years. So there are gray areas, but again, if we try to speak about Modinomics, it is actually introduced with a plan. The plan is to address those areas where Indian economy can sustain for another 3 to 4 years, and eventually to address the gap which exists in different sectors of India to have a long-term impact on the Indian economy.
India is seeking to become the world's third largest economy with the so-called Modenomics. Samsung Electronics, which built a new plant in northern India, will be able to double its smartphone production every month starting the second half of this year, along with Xiaomi, which is already operating 6 smartphone factories in India. Japanese carmaker Honda has also added its 4th factory producing motorcycles last year in the country. Prime Minister Modi, who has achieved some success in attracting foreign capital and promoting manufacturing industries, is actively pursuing what he calls the Act East policy, which focuses on the Asia-Pacific region. He has also reaffirmed the importance of the bilateral partnership with South Korea during President Moon Jae-in's visit to India on July 10th. The Korean government is also keeping a close eye on the Indian market as part of its new southern policy. Along with Japan, which has been increasing investments in India since the early 2000s, the whole world is focused on the changes happening within India as many experts project the country to emerge as the 3rd largest economic powerhouse following the US and China. But for this to happen, they say factors including the caste system and the relatively lagging economic activities of women need to be properly addressed. Prime Minister Narendra Modi's economic policies have been tangibly transforming India's economy over the past 4 years. We talked to an expert who played an important role in the formation of Modinomics and the future direction it should take to further open up India's economy.
Let's now connect to Arvind Panagariya, Professor of Economics at Columbia University, who served as the Vice Chairman of the Indian government think tank National Institution for Transforming India, or also called NITI. Good to have you on, Professor.
Hi, Sangmi. Good to be with you.
Right, so what's the reason behind the establishment of the NITI in 2015, and how is it different from the existing Planning Commission?
Okay, Sangmi, so, starting in 1991, India really made a big switch in its policies. It used to be very much of a command and control economy. A lot of the investment allocations were done by the government through licensing. A lot of other restrictions existed as well. So starting in 1991, India embraced pro-market policies. And the thinking was that we will shift gradually to a market economy. So once that happened, the rationale for writing 5-year plans, which is what the Planning Commission used to do, was a bit lost. So this was something that had been recognized for a long time, but not very much was done by any government. So when Prime Minister Modi came in, he decided that he needed a more modern institution, an institution that will be more consistent with India's commitment to pro-market policies. And so therefore, he decided to replace the Planning Commission by this new institution, which is called the National Institution for Transforming India. And then there is a commission added to the name to the acronym, so it's called Niti Aayog. So its mandate is a bit different.
Right, Professor. Niti Aayog, also in Indian called Commission, you played a huge role in that commission. So as the vice chairman, what kind of advice did you give to the Indian government in terms of implementing this Modinomics?
As a technician, I helped him, and of course some of my colleagues also. There were other economists in the system as well. So we tried to help him implement in a way that would be consistent with his philosophy, consistent with the market philosophy. So, for example, from the Niti Aayog, which I headed, well, the Prime Minister is the chairman of the Niti Aayog, but I was the effective head. So I'm called the vice chairman, but vice chairman is the effective head for running the institution. So, like for instance, I initiated partly the closing down of many of the public sector enterprises which had been defunct, but they were still being kept alive. Likewise, I also recommended that we privatize many of the private sector enterprises. We worked on a number of other reforms, rejuvenating the education system. So higher education reforms we recommended from the Niti Aayog. Also, our medical education was particularly in bad shape. So we recommended changes into medical education as well. So we effectively tried to implement Prime Minister's own agenda. Prime Minister was also keen at a later stage before I left, that we privatize Air India. And we also did the report from Niti Aayog on how to go about privatizing Air India. So that is work still in progress, many of the things that I did.
That's fascinating, Professor. So what is the public sentiment towards Modinomics within India? And is there a general public consensus on this policy?
A very important part of Modinomics is to build up the social safety nets. So very recently, actually, this is after I had left, he also launched a major program for health insurance for the poor. So, the social agenda is also a part of it. The Prime Minister, in his very first year, had also, this is because he's also a bit of a social reformer, so he also had launched this Clean India campaign. And one of the big objectives, this is called Swachh Bharat, that's in Hindi. But it is a campaign that he launched, and the most important component of that campaign was to put an end to open defecation in India. In rural India particularly, households do not have toilets in their houses, and so for defecation they go outside. So he committed himself that within 5 years he would put an end to open defecation, and he has made great progress. Out of the 29 states of India, 17 are already open defecation free, and countrywide, about now in the rural India, about 85% households already have toilets. Now, when he announced, only 34% of the households had toilets in their homes. So it took us 150 years to bring toilets to 34% of the households. But within last 4 years, the percentage is now 85. So big success there. So, Prime Minister is a consensus builder himself. So, and this is his way. He also realizes that almost, 40 to 45% of India's workers are in agriculture. So he also has programs for the benefits of farmers. So while he embraces pro-market policies to maximize the GDP, he also wants these benefits. So he wants growth to be inclusive, and so these benefits have to go down to the people as well. And so he has a big social program for that.
Right. As much as there is success on this pro-market policy, there's got to be some voices of concern. So what should be the future direction of Modinomics?
I would say Well, first and foremost, there is a bit of reform going on in banking currently, but that has to be taken to its logical conclusion, which means that currently vast majority of the Indian banks are owned by the government. They are public sector banks. They need to be privatized. There is some groundwork which will have to be done beforehand because you want to make the banks a little bit stronger before you privatize, but that needs to be done. So privatization of banks has to be very much on the agenda of the next government. Then we need, in a major way, civil service reform. Our civil service, as it currently exists, was conceived as far back as in 1950, and I think times have changed now. In particular, policy making is very specialized, and the kind of civil service we have created is very much a generalist kind of civil service. They don't often have the specialized knowledge. So they need to bring in people from outside with specialized knowledge. And this can be in a variety of different fields. You know, if digitization is a big program, then you need people who understand what is the right policy towards digitization. Economic policy making itself, you know, finance ministry needs very specialized people. So the civil service reform in general, it needs to be opened up in a big way. Start bringing in people from outside on 5-year, 7-year contracts, but try to get the best people that are available. So that's going to be a second challenge that needs to be done. Our judiciary, again, in great need of reform. A number of cases that are outstanding and the long queues for the cases to be resolved are just unbearable. You know, many times cases take 20 to 25 years to bring to conclusion simply because there is such a long queue. So that needs to be addressed as well. But I mean, that's just one symptom of the problems. Many other problems related to judiciary. So judicial reform has to happen as well.
Thank you, Professor. It has been Arvind Panagariya from Columbia University.
My pleasure, Sanmi. Thank you for having me on your show.
This is really a wide range of reforms. As you said, you keep on comparing it to Japan's policy, Abenomics. But how about China, one of the superpowers really in Asia and throughout the world? What do you think India, how can we compare India to China's economy? And do you think India can also expand and really improve its economy as fast as China did?
Today, if you see, the Chinese economy is slightly struggling because some of the regions which were actually industrially very prosperous in China, the coastal provinces, they were actually contributing a lot to China's economic development. That has not really been the case with China's economic development planning for last 4 to 5 years. So therefore, the Chinese economy has been struggling a little, and therefore the Xi Jinping administration is trying to bring innovation to its economic policy today. But in contrast, if we talk about India's economic policy, even though we have not been really that attractive economy in comparison to the Chinese economic development, but our constant endeavor has been how to bring innovation to economic reforms. And there actually Modinomics actually becomes the highlight story of the global economic development, global economic scenario today, because it's talking about innovations continuously, Skill India, Digital India, Make in India, the Swasth Bharat Abhijan, all of these are innovative thinking, which are actually closely linked with social and political aspects of India and linked with the economic fortunes of India. On the contrary, China has been lagging on the political reforms greatly. So if we try to have a comparative study about India's economic development planning and China's developmental planning, I think in the longer run, in 20 to 30 years, we will be definitely crushing the China's economic development planning. But then India has to carry out with sustained economic reforms and bring continuous innovation to its economic policy. Modinomics might stay or may not stay tomorrow, but India has to bring constant innovation ideas to its economic development planning, and I think that is going to be the key to India's developmental fortunes in times to come.
That's very insightful. Doctor, thank you so much for your expertise today.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
That's all we have for today. Thank you for tuning in to The Point World Affairs, and we hope to see you again next week.